The first time I realized my children had stopped seeing me as their father was the day they handed me a brochure for Sunset Pines. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the mail hadn't come yet, and I was sitting in my recliner, the one their mother had picked out 30 years ago, the one with the tear on the armrest that I refused to get fixed because it still smelled like her perfume. I was 74 years old. My hands didn't work like they used to. My knees made sounds that reminded me of stepping on frozen snow. But my mind was still sharp enough to cut glass. They came together. My oldest, Mark, walked in first. He's a real estate agent now. Drives a nice car. Wears shoes that cost more than my first monthly rent back in 1972. Behind him came Lisa, my daughter, who married a dentist and somehow forgot that I used to read her bedtime stories every night for 12 years without missing a single one. And then there was David, my youngest, the one who used to follow me around the garage with a toy hammer while I fixed the lawnmower. He wouldn't look at me. That should have been my first warning. Mark did the talking. He always does. He sat on the couch across from me, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and used that voice. You know, the one. The voice people use when they're about to put a dog to sleep. Soft, controlled, fake. Dad, he said. We've been talking. I remember thinking how strange those 4 words sounded. We've been talking. Not we've been worried about you. Not we've been thinking about how to help you. Just we've been talking. Like I was a problem they had finally decided to solve. He held up the brochure. Sunset Pines. The picture showed a white building with flowers in front of the sign and a woman in a pink sweater pushing an empty wheelchair while smiling at nothing. I've always hated those pictures. They put smiling people on the cover of nursing homes the way they put filters on dating profiles. This all lies until you show up. It's time, Dad, Mark said. I looked at Lisa. She was staring at the floor. I looked at David. He was staring at the window. Neither of them said a word. And in that moment, I understood something that I had been refusing to understand for maybe 5 years. My children had already made their decision. They weren't here to ask me. They were here to tell me. For my own good, Mark said. Those exact words. It's for your own good, Dad. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. Because when you've lived as long as I have, you learn something important about arguments. They only work when the other person is willing to hear you. And these 3 standing in my living room, they had already stopped listening before they even walked through the door. So I went. Sunset Pines wasn't a prison. I want to be clear about that. Prisons have better food and younger guards. Sunset Pines was something worse. It was a waiting room, a place where time doesn't move forward but just sits there like old water in a glass, growing stale and gray until you forget what fresh even tasted like. My room was at the end of the hall. Room 117. It smelled like bleach and boiled vegetables and something else I could never identify. Something sweet and chemical, like the way a funeral home smells when they've tried too hard to cover up the truth. The bed was narrow. The sheets were thin. The window looked out at a parking lot and a dumpster that never got emptied enough. The first night, I sat on the edge of that bed and listened to the woman in the room next to mine scream for someone named Margaret. She screamed for hours. Nobody came. Nobody ever came. That's the thing about places like Sunset Pines. You learn very quickly that the world outside has moved on without you. Your screams don't travel past the hallway. Your tears don't make it to the front desk. You become a ghost while you're still breathing. The nurses weren't cruel. I don't want to make them sound like villains. They were tired, overworked, underpaid. They had 60 patients and 4 hands each. So when I needed help getting to the bathroom, I waited. When my food came cold, I ate it cold. When my back hurt so bad I couldn't sleep, I stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks until the sun came up. My children visited exactly twice in the first month. The first time, Mark came alone. He stood in the doorway of my room for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. He told me about the new listing he was selling. He told me about his son's soccer game. He told me about the weather. He did not ask me how I was doing. He did not ask me if I was okay. When he left, he hugged me the way you hug a coworker you don't really like. Quick, stiff, relieved that it was over. The second time, all 3 of them came together. Lisa brought a fruit basket. David brought a new sweater. Mark brought paperwork. He set it on my bedside table and said, "Just some things you need to sign, Dad. House stuff. Nothing to worry about." I should have read it. I know that now. Every lawyer in every movie I've ever watched screamed at me from the back of my mind. Read it, old man. Don't sign anything without reading it. But here's the thing about being 74 years old in a room that smells like bleach and forgotten people. Here's the thing about being tired. Really tired. Not just sleepy, but soul tired. The kind of tired that makes you stop fighting because fighting has never once made anything better. I signed. 3 weeks later, I found out what I had signed. It wasn't a maintenance request. It wasn't a power of attorney. It was permission. Permission for them to sell my house. The house I had bought in 1985. The house where my children took their first steps. The house where my wife took her last breath. The house that still had her robe hanging on the back of the bathroom door because I couldn't bring myself to move it. They sold it in 4 days. For days. 38 years of memories. Gone in less than a week. A developer bought it. He's gonna tear it down and build 2 townhouses. I looked it up on my phone, the one my son David said I was too old to use properly. The listing said, "Charming fixer-upper with great potential." Charming. Fixer-upper. My home. My life. Reduced to a real estate advertisement. I cried that night. Not the quiet tears of a man who has accepted his fate. I cried the way a child cries. Loud. Ugly. Messy. I cried into my pillow so the woman next door wouldn't hear me. And when I was done crying, I felt something else. Something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. I was too old for that. This was cold. Steady. The kind of anger that doesn't shake or shout but just sits there in your chest like a stone. Getting heavier and heavier until you have to do something with it or it will crush you. I thought about calling a lawyer. But what lawyer takes the case of a broke old man in a nursing home? I thought about calling the police. But what crime had been committed? I signed the papers. My own hand. My own signature. It didn't matter that I didn't read them. It didn't matter that my son had put them in front of me while I was at my lowest. The law doesn't care about tears. The law cares about signatures. So I did the only thing I could do. I waited. And while I waited, I watched. Watching is something old men are good at. We've had decades of practice. We watch people lie. We watch people pretend. We watch people show us exactly who they are while trying desperately to show us something else. My children thought I was fading. They thought the man who taught them how to ride bikes and tie their shoes and stand up to bullies had disappeared into the fog of old age. They were wrong. I listened to every conversation. I watched every visit. I paid attention to the way Mark checked his watch every time he walked through my door. I noticed how Lisa only came when she needed something. A signature, a memory for a Facebook post, a photo of me looking frail so she could show her friends what a good daughter she was. I saw David's guilt, the way he couldn't meet my eyes, the way he always stood by the door, like he was ready to run. And then, one day, something happened that changed everything. I was sitting in the common area. That's what they called it. The common area. A room with beige walls and a television that was always tuned to a channel nobody wanted to watch and chairs arranged in a circle so we could all stare at each other without having to actually talk. I was reading a newspaper, yes, a real newspaper, the kind made of paper because some habits from my generation refused to die, when a nurse came in and said I had a visitor. I looked up, expecting Mark. Maybe Lisa, if she had run out of content for her social media. But it wasn't Mark. It wasn't Lisa. It was a woman I had never seen before. She was young, maybe 30, dressed in a black suit that looked expensive. She carried a leather folder and walked like someone who had never once been told to slow down. She sat across from me. She introduced herself as a paralegal from a law firm I had never heard of. And then she said something that stopped my heart. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "we've been looking for you for a long time." I didn't understand. I told her she must have the wrong person. My name is common. There are probably 100 Robert Harrisons in this city alone. But she shook her head. She opened her folder and pulled out a photograph. An old photograph. Faded at the edges. The kind of photograph you find in a shoebox in the back of a closet. It was a picture of me, from 40 years ago, standing next to a man I hadn't thought about in decades. A man named Samuel Cross. Samuel Cross was my best friend. We met in 1983, when we both worked at the same auto shop. He was the kind of friend who showed up at your door at 2 in the morning with a six-pack and a problem, and didn't leave until you had solved both. He was loud. He was generous. He was the only person I knew who laughed harder than me. We lost touch in the early 90s. He moved to another state. I got busy with work, with kids, with the slow drowning of adult responsibilities. We promised to stay in touch. We didn't. It happens. It's sad, but it happens. I assumed he was still out there somewhere, living his life, maybe thinking about me as often as I thought about him, which is to say, not often enough, but with genuine fondness when I did. He died 6 months ago. I didn't know. Nobody had told me. Why would they? I was just an old friend from 40 years ago. But before he died, Samuel did something. He remembered something. He remembered a promise we had made to each other back in 1985, sitting on the hood of his broken-down truck, drinking cheap beer and watching the sun set over the highway. We had promised to take care of each other, no matter what, no matter where life took us. If one of us made it and the other didn't, the one who made it would make sure the other was okay. Samuel made it. He didn't talk about his money. That was the kind of man he was. He drove an old truck. He wore jeans with holes in the knees. He lived in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. But Samuel Cross, it turned out, was a very wealthy man. He had started a small business in the 80s that had grown into something much bigger. He had invested wisely. He had never married. He had no children of his own. And in his will, he had left everything to me. The paralegal said the number out loud. I won't repeat it here because it still doesn't feel real. But it was enough. More than enough. Enough to buy back my house 10 times over. Enough to leave Sunset Pines and never look back. Enough to make sure my children never had to worry about money again. But I didn't want them to never worry about money again. I wanted them to worry. The paralegal asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I needed time to think. She gave me her card and told me to call whenever I was ready. And then she left, and I sat in that beige room with the bad television and the sad chairs, and I thought about my children. I thought about Mark, who sold my house without telling me, who handed me papers while I was too broken to read them, who hugged me like a stranger and left like a thief. I thought about Lisa, who posted photos of herself visiting me but never stayed longer than 20 minutes, who brought fruit baskets that the nurses ate and flowers that died on the windowsill. I thought about David, who couldn't look at me, who stood by the door, who let his guilt do all the work of loving me so he didn't have to. And I made a decision. I didn't call my children. I didn't tell them about Samuel. I didn't mention the will or the money or the black SUV that would soon be pulling into the parking lot of Sunset Pines. I let them believe that their plan had worked, that I was exactly where they wanted me. Forgotten, helpless, done. I waited, and while I waited, I made my own plan. I called the paralegal back. I told her I needed a lawyer, not just any lawyer, the best lawyer money could buy. I told her I needed an investigator, someone who could dig into my children's finances, their decisions, their lies. I told her I needed to know everything. Every document Mark had made me sign. Every conversation my children had had about me behind my back. Every penny they had taken from the sale of my house. Samuel's money didn't just give me freedom. He gave me power. Real power. The kind of power that comes with knowing that you can afford to fight back. The kind of power that comes with realizing that the people who tried to bury you forgot to check if you were still breathing. Took 3 months. 3 months of sitting in room 117, eating cold food and watching bad television and pretending to be the broken old man my children wanted me to be. 3 months of smiling when they visited, of signing whatever they put in front of me, of letting them believe that their father had finally faded away into the gray fog of old age. But I wasn't fading. I was waiting. And then, on a Thursday afternoon in October, the plan was ready. The black SUV pulled into the parking lot at exactly 2:47 p.m. I know the time because I was looking out my window, watching the dumpster that never got emptied enough, when I saw it turn in from the main road. It was a Lincoln. New. Shiny. The kind of vehicle driven by people who don't have to worry about the cost of gas or the price of maintenance. The driver stepped out. He was tall. Broad shoulders. Gray hair cut short. He wore a dark suit and sunglasses, even though it was cloudy. He walked toward the front entrance of Sunset Pines with the confidence of a man who had never once been told to wait. I watched him disappear through the doors, and then I sat back on my bed and waited. 2 minutes later, my door opened. The man stood in the doorway. He took off his sunglasses, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other. 2 old men. One in a cheap nursing home gown. One in a suit that cost more than most people's rent. "Dad," he said. I didn't recognize him. Not at first. But then I looked closer. The shape of his jaw. The way he held his shoulders. The sound of his voice. Deep, steady, familiar in a way that made my chest hurt. "Sam," I whispered. He smiled. And suddenly he wasn't a stranger in an expensive suit. He was a boy. A boy of 17 years old with a reckless smile and dirt on his jeans and a heart too big for his chest. "I've been looking for you for a long time," he said. This was Samuel's son. His only son. The child he had never told me about because the boy's mother had taken him when he was 2 years old and moved across the country. Samuel had spent 30 years searching for him. And 6 months before he died, he had finally found him. His name was Michael. He was 47 years old. He was a lawyer. A good one. The kind of lawyer who took cases that mattered, who fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. And when his father died, when he read the will that left everything to a man named Robert Harrison, he made a decision. He decided to find me. He told me everything. How Samuel had never stopped talking about me. How he had told Michael stories about the old days, about the auto shop, about the nights spent on the hood of a broken-down truck. How his last words had been about a promise. Promise to take care of each other. "My father loved you," Michael said. "He never forgot you. And when I read his will, when I saw your name, I knew I had to find you. I knew he would want me to make sure you were okay." I started crying. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I sat on the edge of that narrow bed in that room that smelled like bleach and old vegetables, and I cried like a baby. Because for 3 months I had been alone. For 3 months I had been forgotten. For 3 months I had convinced myself that nobody in the world cared whether I lived or died. But Samuel cared. Even from the grave. Even across 40 years of silence. He cared. Michael helped me pack my things. Not that I had much. A few photos. My wife's robe, folded carefully into a duffel bag. The newspaper I had been reading the day the paralegal came. I left behind the fruit baskets. I left behind the sweater David had brought. I left behind everything that reminded me of my children and their betrayal. The black SUV pulled out of the parking lot at 3:22 p.m. I watched Sunset Pines disappear in the side mirror. The white building. The sign with the flowers. The dumpster that never got emptied enough. I watched it all shrink and vanish, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Michael took me to a hotel. Not a cheap one. A nice one. A room with a view of the city and sheets that didn't smell like bleach and a bed that didn't make my back hurt. He ordered room service. Steak. Mashed potatoes. A glass of red wine. The first real meal I had eaten in 3 months. And then he told me the rest of his plan. Because Michael didn't just come to rescue me. He came to help me fight back. The investigator I had hired had done his job. We had evidence. Evidence that Mark had manipulated me into signing those papers. Evidence that my children had sold the house for far less than it was worth to a company owned by one of Mark's business partners. Evidence of lies. Evidence of greed. Evidence of betrayal. Michael looked at me across the table. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I thought about it. I thought about Mark, standing in my living room, using his gentle voice to put me away like an old dog. I thought about Lisa posting her photos, playing her role. I thought about David standing by the door, too weak to do the right thing. "I want to see them," I said. "All 3 of them. Together. I want them to look me in the eye." Michael nodded. "I can make that happen." 3 days later, my children received a letter. Not from me, from Michael's law firm. It was an invitation to a meeting at a hotel downtown, the same hotel where I was staying, in fact. The letter didn't say what the meeting was about. It just said that their presence was required to discuss legal matters related to their father's estate. They came. Of course they came. They thought they were going to get more money. They thought the old man had finally died and left them something. They walked into that hotel conference room with their fancy shoes and their fake smiles, ready to collect their prize. Instead, they found me. I was sitting at the head of the table. Michael stood behind me. The investigator sat in the corner with a recorder. And on the table, spread out in neat rows, was every piece of evidence we had gathered. Every document, every email, every text message, every lie. Mark saw me first. His face went white, then red, then white again. Lisa gasped. David just stared, his mouth hanging open like a fish on a dock. "Dad," Mark said, "what are you doing here? You're supposed to be..." "Supposed to be what?" I asked. My voice was calm, steady. The voice of a man who had spent 3 months in a cheap nursing home, eating cold food and sleeping on thin sheets and waiting for this exact moment. Supposed to be dead? Supposed to be forgotten? Supposed to be rotting away in Sunset Pines while you 3 split up my house and moved on with your lives. Nobody spoke. So I did. I told them everything. I told them about Samuel, about his will, about Michael, about the money. I watched their faces change as the numbers sank in. The realization that they had thrown away their inheritance. That they had betrayed a man who was never as broke or as broken as they thought he was. And then I told them about the evidence. "You have 2 choices," I said. "The first choice is that we take all of this to court. We show a judge what you did. How you manipulated me. How you sold my house out from under me. How you put me in a nursing home and walked away like I was nothing. The second choice is that you walk out of this room right now, and you never speak to me again. No phone calls. No visits. No fake Facebook posts about what a good daughter or son you are. You leave me alone. Forever." Mark opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Lisa started crying. Real tears this time. Not the performative kind. The ugly kind. The kind that comes from a place of shame. David didn't say anything. He just looked at me. And for the first time in years, he didn't look away. They chose the second option. All 3 of them. They walked out of that conference room without another word. Mark didn't hug me. Lisa didn't post about it on social media. David didn't stand by the door. They just left. And I let them. I didn't take them to court. I could have. I had the evidence. I had the money. I had Michael, who was more than ready to fight. But here's what I learned in those 3 months at Sunset Pines. Here's what I learned while I was sitting in that beige room, watching the dumpster, listening to the woman next door scream for Margaret. Revenge doesn't fix anything. Feels good. For about 5 minutes. But then you're left with the same emptiness you started with. The same loneliness. The same grief. What I wanted wasn't revenge. What I wanted was to be seen. To be remembered. To be more than a problem to be solved or a burden to be discarded. And I got that. Not from my children. From Samuel. From a promise made 40 years ago on the hood of a broken-down truck. From a man who never forgot me, even when the world told him he should. Michael and I are partners now. He runs the law firm. I sit in the office sometimes, reading the newspaper, drinking coffee, watching young lawyers rush around like their lives depend on it. He calls me Dad. Not because he has to, because he wants to, because somewhere along the way, an old man and a stranger became family. My children still call sometimes. Mark leaves voicemails I never answer. Lisa sends emails I delete without reading. David shows up at the office once a month, stands outside the window, and waits. I haven't gone out to see him yet. Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. But here's the thing about being old. You learn that forgiveness and trust are 2 different things. You can forgive someone without letting them back into your life. You can understand why they did what they did without excusing it. You can love your children and still protect yourself from them. I live in a small house now. Not my old house. That one is gone. Turned into townhouses like the developer promised. But this house is nice. Quiet. It has a porch where I sit in the evenings and watch the sun go down. I have a garden now. Tomatoes, peppers, basil because my wife used to love basil. Michael comes over for dinner every Sunday. He's learning to cook. He's not very good at it, but I don't tell him that. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I go out to the porch and look up at the stars. I think about Samuel. I think about the promise we made. I think about how he kept it, even after all those years, even from the grave. And I think about my children. About Mark's expensive shoes and Lisa's fake tears and David's guilty eyes. I think about the day they put me in Sunset Pines. The day they sold my house. The day they forgot that I was their father, not their burden. I don't hate them. I don't even really feel angry anymore. I just feel sad. Sad for what they lost. Sad for what they threw away. Sad for the grandchildren who will grow up hearing stories about a grandfather they never knew because their parents made choices they couldn't take back. But I don't feel sorry for myself. Not anymore. Because here's the truth. The truth that took me 74 years and 3 months in a cheap nursing home to understand. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who keeps their promises, who looks at you when you're old and broken and forgotten and says, I see you, you matter, you are not alone. My children didn't do that, but Samuel did, and Michael does. And somewhere out there are people who will do that for you too. People who will remember you. People who will find you. People who will pull up in a black SUV and call you by the name that matters most. So if you're listening to this story, and you feel like the world has forgotten you, like the people who were supposed to love you have left you behind, here's what I want you to remember. You are not done. Not yet. Not ever. As long as you are breathing, there is time. Time for new promises. Time for new beginnings. Time for someone to walk through the door and call your name. My children thought I had nobody left. They were wrong. And someday maybe someone will prove you wrong too.